Everybody, just go ahead and take a deep breath. Remember, these are just opinions. These are just opinions. Hello everyone and welcome to Bound in Prose. I am your host Matt, and today I'm going to talk about a very well-known author, Stephen King. Now, if you've watched my top 10, you know that he is one of my favorite authors. He's an author that really got me into reading early on in my life, and it was his books and fantasy were the only books that I could really get into for the longest time. I mean, that has changed, but I have continued to keep up with Stephen King as best as I can and try to make my way through all of his novels. I haven't read everything that he has written. He has a rather large body of work. But today I thought I would just talk about some that really stood out to me, some that are, I would say, quote-unquote underrated, and then one or two that just didn't really do it for me. So let's just have some fun. Let's talk about Stephen King. Now, one of my original thoughts for this video was I wanted to do underrated Stephen King novels. But I don't know. I feel like that's some treacherous territory with his fandom. You know, what's underrated, what's really great. And I also just didn't want to make a video that was like, I really love Pet Sematary and Salem's Lot and It and The Shining. We all know those and we all, you know, appreciate those, and those are his more popular works. So I'm going to try not to talk about some of those that are those really big Stephen King books. I'm going to try to talk about some lower mid-tier books. And I mean that in terms of popularity, not necessarily the quality. So each book that I talk about, I will talk about as an individual thing and give you my opinion on it. So anyways, let's go ahead and get started. So first up, I want to talk about one of my favorite of his more recent novels, recent-ish. It's still in this past decade, but that is Mr. Mercedes. Now, this is the first of the Bill Hodges trilogy, and it follows the story of an older detective as he is trying to track down this serial killer who is Brady Hartsfield. And I thoroughly enjoyed this book. I kind of like those police procedurals, and this fits into that mold very nicely. It's still sort of Stephen King-ish. It's a bit more realistic than a lot of what he's known for writing. It's certainly imbued with a lot of his sort of isms, so we kind of maybe potentially get a little bit of like supernatural elements going on, or the potential for it. But yeah, it pretty much sticks to the realistic for the most part. So the ending of this book is the culmination of this cat and mouse game between Bill Hodges and Brady Hartsfield. And I won't get into it too much because, I mean, it's not that huge. If you either like Stephen King or if you like police procedurals, I'd say go ahead and pick this one up. But the ending, for me, I had to stop and put the book down because my heart was racing as we were trying to get to the conclusion of this. And so I thought that this was just fantastic, breakneck pace at the end. And yeah, so Mr. Mercedes. And I will go ahead and say about the trilogy in its entirety that it's a really strong trilogy. The second book kind of moves away from the Brady Hartsfield character, and the third book brings it back. And the third book is the most supernatural of the three, but I think that each one of these installments is incredibly strong. So if we're going to talk about the Bill Hodges trilogy, then we need to talk about one of the characters that shows up in there that gets her own, as of now, trilogy. I don't know if the trilogy is ended. I have not read the most recent of this storyline, but the first in the Holly Gibson storyline is The Outsider. So try to make sure that you can see the title there. But The Outsider. Now, I love the character of Holly Gibson, but I am kind of on the fence about her storyline so far. I still think that she is an incredibly strong character. I really like reading about her, and I like the setup of what's going on in here, but I just don't think it follows through as well as the Bill Hodges trilogy. So Holly's trilogy is more in line with the supernatural, sort of what Stephen King is known for writing. And she is trying to hunt these beings that she has called the Outsiders, that are basically shapeshifters. And this starts off, there was a boy that was murdered, and they're trying to figure out, well, I think they know who did it. I think that's right. They have this person that, was either seen, or his DNA was there or something, but anyways, he didn't actually commit the murder. So they're trying to figure out this mystery of how this could have happened. So it's still sort of a procedural. It's still like a mystery, and Holly kind of follows through in line with what she learned working with Bill Hodges. But yes, the big disappointment for me in this book was the ending. And I mean, I understand and I get it, but there's so much buildup, and I think that the Outsiders, these shapeshifters, are so incredibly creepy and interesting. And there's like a couple of scenes in here that, I mean, gave me goosebumps. There's so much to like, but after all of this time and buildup, the final conflict between Holly and the Outsider is over like that. I mean, it's such a quick ending, and just not the most fulfilling. So that brings me into the second of the Holly Gibson trilogies. So the second story with Holly Gibson is in If It Bleeds. Now, this was really interesting, and I have to say I was a little bummed with this because I wanted that story to be an entire novel, but it's more of like a short story, and it does take up the majority of this book. But there are, I want to say 3 other stories in here. And so, I don't know. I'm not a huge fan of anthologies and things of that nature. And I don't know, it kind of put me off that this story was just going to be thrown into an anthology, and that Holly didn't get like a full second book. Next up, we have Magical Paintings and Ghost Ships with Duma. Now, I'm going to go ahead and be honest. I have not read this book since 2008, so a lot of the details for me are a bit fuzzy, but I do remember picking this up and thinking this is a turning point in Stephen King's writing. I mean, there was a while there that a lot of what he was putting out was not well received, and some of it I haven't read, and I've even heard some people say that, like, Cell is his worst book. I have not read Cell, and it is because people dog on that book so much. But it seems like there was just a period of time where what he was putting out wasn't quite landing with his readers or critics. And so I had kind of moved away and been a little bit more into one of my fantasy phases. But anyways, I went ahead and picked up Duma as soon as it came out. I wanted to give it a shot. I had some extra money, beautiful copy. And so, but I read it and I was thoroughly engrossed. I thought, yes, here we go. This is the Stephen King that I know and love. This book follows the story of Edgar Fremantle, a man who was in a construction accident and lost his right arm, I believe. Yes, so his life kind of comes crumbling down after this, and he moves to Florida, to the coast, to begin rehabilitation and to kind of resume artistry, which is something that he's always enjoyed. And so as he is there, his paintings possess a sort of power that he can't describe. And I remember there was one scene where it's like he could see a ghost ship on the horizon. And so it was just like super interesting, very supernatural. And I remember getting to the ending when you find out what's causing all of this and thinking like, okay, here's one of Stephen King's monsters that is worthy of a lot of his better novels. And so, anyways, I thoroughly enjoyed Duma, and Actually, now that I've taken up painting in the past few years, I think that I would love to go back and reread this. And speaking of that, a very quick aside, with my setup here, you can kind of see this painting. It's hard to get the whole thing in there, but sometimes I feel like it's really weird to just kind of have this bottom portion, so I'm going to tilt the camera and let you see this painting that's behind me. So yes, I painted that, and I really love like those vintage pinup model like photos, and I actually had a friend in Iowa that does this kind of photography, and she actually took the picture that I used to paint this. And so anyways, now you can see what's up there behind me, and maybe it doesn't quite look so crude from just the bottom. Next up is a book that I neither love nor hate, but I can certainly appreciate, and that is Billy Summers. So Billy Summers follows the story of Billy Summers, who is a hitman who is hired to do this job. He's this excellent sniper and gets in with some, less than reputable characters and is hired to do this job and doesn't know whether or not he's being played and is going to be killed after he takes care of this job. And so there's some cat and mouse going on here. There's, some unsurety as to like what his true role in all of this is. I liked this book. I don't hate it. It's not what I expected. And it was one of those that I found myself like not really wanting like to pick it up. I just wasn't like excited whenever I would think about reading it, but then I would sit down and start reading it, and I was thoroughly engrossed. So it was just a really weird reading experience for me. And part of that is, it's supposed to be about this hitman, and, maybe some of it is my own expectations that kind of dampened this reading experience for me. But, I'm thinking, well, that's really cool, and maybe there's going to be a lot of action and shootouts and, on the run. But the vast majority of this book takes place in a safe house. And so Billy Summers is either sitting around not hearing from anybody, waiting for this job to take place, or he is sitting around in his safe house after he has completed this job, waiting for the heat to die down. And a lot of this book is like my same problem with the end of 1Q84. It's just, why did we need to spend all of this time? I mean, it's well written, and the character of Billy Summers is interesting, and some of what happens is interesting, but it was just such an odd experience, and it's such a slow burn, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but it's just not what I expected out of this book. But still, I ended up giving it 3 stars. It's just a very okay, fine. It was another Stephen King book for me. Next up is an incredibly solid ghost story, and that is Bag of Bones. Bag of Bones follows the story of Mike Noonan, a novelist who has recently lost his wife, and because of this tragedy, he is finding himself with a bad case of writer's block, and he is plagued by nightmares. And so he goes out to his hometown to live in a cabin and try to get away from everything and sort of recover. And when he gets there, he finds out that the town has pretty much been taken over and is under the fist of this incredibly vindictive millionaire. And he finds a woman, and her daughter, is trying to get away. Is it granddaughter? It's the millionaire's granddaughter. It's the millionaire's granddaughter. And so this millionaire is trying to take her away from her mother, and it's just all this horrible stuff. And anyways, Mike falls in love with this girl, Maddie, who is the mother of this child. And there's also a lot of ghostly apparitions that begin to happen at his cabin. Now, I'm going to go ahead and say, I'm sorry if that is a blabbering summary of this book. This is another one that I read about a decade ago, and while I just remember really enjoying it and being completely sucked into the storyline, a lot of the details have left. So, anyways, but I think for the most part, I remember this kind of being a little bit of a slow burn at the beginning, and I kind of went into this one with very lowered expectations. I think at the time, this was like a book that I was kind of heard of, but it just kept getting pushed back in my TBR. And then I was gifted this beautiful copy for Christmas, and I decided it's sitting there, let's just go ahead and read it. And I started it, and I would just spend hours reading and getting through it. And yeah, I thought this was an incredibly strong book. And yeah, and I know that this was like either turned into a movie or a miniseries, which I have not watched. I'm not a really big fan of like Stephen King miniseries. And some of his movies are pretty good, but or some of the movies based off of his books. But anyways, I tend to just stick with his writing. But anyways, yes. Bag of Bones, highly recommend. Next up, we have Stephen King's glorious return to fantasy with Fairy Tale. Now, I know I can feel it from here. There is a lot of people in the Stephen King fandom that are clutching their pearls right now, and that is okay. Take a deep breath, like I said. I loved this book. Absolutely loved it. I know that a lot of people out there kind of feel like it's a bit slow. It's not really the best of his fantasy. It was kind of a disappointment for a lot of people. And I haven't watched a ton of videos on this because I was really trying to stick away from spoilers. And whenever I was finished, I don't know, Justin is the one that was kind of watching all of the reviews on this and was kind of getting very mixed reviews, which is fine, which is fair. If you don't like this book, you're not a moron. It's just, that's your opinion, and that's fine. So, anyways, but Justin and I buddy read this, and even though we're both pretty busy, we blew through this in about a week. I mean, we would meet up, and we would turn on the audio books and go through a bunch of chapters together, and we both ate this book up. And so I've heard some people say that they feel like the first part is really slow. I had a very different reaction to that. I was so thoroughly engaged with the first part that I kind of forgot this was supposed to be a fantasy novel. And so it went pretty quickly for me. And then when you actually go to this fantasy world, you're like, oh, well, we've got like the most interesting part of the book left. Like, let's go. And this fantasy world is very Stephen King-esque, very dark, very, I don't know, filled with sort of this horror that has come over the world. This is underneath the surface, it's a very standard like fantasy novel, but the way Stephen King constructs it makes it a very appealing, and I don't want to say unique, but it's fresh. Like, to me, it was a fresh fantasy experience. I will love to go back and reread this, and I would actually like to do a little bit more thorough of a review on this book. But yes, Fairy Tale by Stephen King is one of my favorites of his more recent works. So next up, I want to shift gears just a little bit and talk about my least favorite Stephen King book. Now, I put my copy of it in a little free library a while back so somebody else could pick it up and maybe they'll really enjoy it. So I have gone ahead and tried to create a little artistic rendering of a cover so you'll have something interesting to look at. So next we're going to talk about From a Buick 8. So From a Buick 8 is the story about a car that sits in a garage and weird things come out of the trunk. And so I don't want to be too harsh on this book. I feel like I know what King was going for. It's a very Lovecraftian type of story. So cosmic horror. We never get the explanation for what the car is, what the dimension is, anything like that. And that is very Lovecraftian. But most of the story is just the son of this cop who, I think the car drove him crazy or he ended up dying or something. I don't know. That most of that book I was just trying to get through. That was one of the few Stephen King books that I have almost completely shut my brain off and read the words on the page so I could say that I read it. I just did not care for that book. I think the pacing is just one speed the whole time. It's just, hey, well, why don't you tell them about your experience with the car? Hey, well, why don't you tell them the crazy thing that happened when you were investigating the car? And that's just all the book is. And, you know, like a fog comes out of the back of the trunk, and then like a weird bat creature, and here's a tentacle that comes out of the car, but then it goes back in, and it's just a lot of experimentation with the car, and then at the very end, people are just decide like, hey, just leave it in the garage and don't touch it. I mean, it's just like so unfulfilling in the end, and I don't know. Maybe if I were to reread it and know what I'm getting myself into, I might enjoy it a bit more. Now that actually, since I've read that, I've actually read some Lovecraft. So, I don't know. Like I said, maybe on a different read, I would enjoy it. But I did not care for it. And it's one of the few times that I have shut a Stephen King book and been angry. And angry from my reading experience, not like angry with the story and like the way that I was meant to be. Next up, we have a piece of nonfiction by Stephen King, and that is on writing. So I picked this book up one day. I had started writing my own novel and wanted to, get some insight and see if I could gain any knowledge from one of the masters on writing your own novel, and I thought this was a really intriguing read. Some of this is autobiographical, and some of it actually discusses the craft of writing, and so there was a lot going on here, and I really enjoyed all of it. One of the big things that he talked about in this book was that writing is like telepathy. It's like a modern day, well, not modern day, but just like a form of telepathy. I thought that was really intriguing. And also how he talked about being able to like allow your reader to fill in some of the blanks, that you didn't necessarily have to describe everything down to the nails in the floorboards, because people will fill in the gaps. And so there was a lot to mull over reading this. And I know that this is used a lot in writing classes. So, yeah, if you're interested in that kind of thing, if you've ever thought about trying your hand at writing, definitely go ahead and pick up on writing. So let's just talk about a few more, and then maybe I'll just kind of rapid fire a couple of reviews for some of his other works, and then we'll wrap it up for today. So the next one is a sequel to one of King's most well-known books. So I want to talk about Dr. Sleep. I think this is another moment where I need to remind you, just breathe, it's okay. A lot of different and mixed opinions on this book. So I will say that I really enjoyed Dr. Sleep. So Dr. Sleep is the sequel to The Shining. Yes, everybody knows The Shining. The Kubrick film, the different TV adaptations of it. It's been around for a while. It's a very well-known and revered story in all of its mediums. And so this book came out fairly recently, and there was a super large time gap between The Shining and Dr. Sleep. And so this one picks up with Danny Torrance as an adult, and he has become an alcoholic and is kind of still dealing with some of the fallout from his time at the Overlook Hotel. But he learns as the book kind of progresses how to shut away some of these visions or these ghosts in his mind. And then we have a separate storyline with the True Knot, which are these people that basically eat like the energy or the shining of these individuals that have this ability. And so they are chasing after Abra, this young girl who is incredibly powerful when it comes to the Shining. And she and Danny cross paths and end up having to take on the True Knot. I think that this is as worthy a sequel as it could have possibly been. I mean, between the time that The Shining came out and, the movie adaptation of that has been ingrained in popular culture, and we've had all of these different interpretations of The Shining. I mean, it's become a revered story. And so I think that any sequel was going to fall short for a lot of people. And I wonder if that's what happened here. I mean, if you don't like this book, you don't like the book, and that's fine. I'm sorry you didn't enjoy it. Do I think that this is like the best like piece of literature out there? Is it Stephen King's strongest book? Absolutely not. But I enjoyed it, and I think that it calls back a lot from The Shining. It ties that story together in this really well and kind of gives us more in terms of what The Shining is and how people can use it. And then like we get the callbacks with the Overlook Hotel in the end. And I will say that the movie adaptation of Dr. Sleep was excellent, and another of those times when I think it's as good as a follow-up could have been. So to round out sort of the main reviews of this video, I think we should just go ahead and pick one of the most obscure of Stephen King's works to talk about and get this book a little bit more attention, and hopefully more people will read it and it'll actually become like one of his more well-known books, and that is The Stand. Now, obviously that's a joke. Like, this is probably one of his most well-known and most revered like novels, and it's a chunky thing, so it is quite an undertaking. But people that gush about The Stand, and it plays such a large role in like The Dark Tower, that is all for a reason. The Stand is excellent. It is an apocalyptic story that follows this disease. Hits a little close to home, right? This disease that has ravaged mankind, and the survivors in the end have to sort of start rebuilding. There is a city, I want to say it was Las Vegas. It's also been a while since I read this one, but there's this city that, becomes the home of some of the other people who are alive, and there is one of Stephen King's most well-known bad guys, Randall Flagg, who shows up and starts leading the people in the city. And I want to say that Randall Flagg is like Stephen King's take on the devil. I mean, that's basically what he's supposed to be. If not explicitly, then that's kind of the character that he is built up to be, or like the Antichrist or something like that. But I've also heard people say that this is King's retelling of Lord of the Rings, which I'm a huge Lord of the Rings fan, and I can see that in some of this. I need to reread it. So my first time reading this book, I was on a plane going to China, and I thought, there is no better time to tackle this thing. So 18 hours on a plane, let's get through some of this. So I read for most of the trip. I cannot sleep on planes, which is a curse, but so anyways, I took this and I poured through it, and I read over half of it on that trip alone. And so it's really good. The first part is a little slow, but that buildup is so worth it, because you slowly but surely see this disease take over humankind, and it is incredibly realistic and terrifying to see how the outbreak could go from just this, very small, like one person gets it, to it decimating a population. And I really enjoyed the whole like second part of the novel, where the survivors are coming together and sort of rebuilding and, helping one another. And then the whole, business with Randall Flagg. He is such a terrifying villain, and the ending was really interesting. I can see where one of those characters is a very Gollum type character. But anyways, yes, The Stand, it's super long, but it's worth every page. Okay, the rapid fire bonus round. So let's just talk about a few of his other books, and I will just basically give you a one or two sentence summaries on what I thought of it. So, The Institute. Really intriguing. Really liked The Institute. Sleeping Beauties that he wrote with his son. Didn't quite care for it. A little too long, kind of middling, but it was fine. Under the Dome. Really, I enjoyed it, but it's a bit too long for me, in my opinion, in the explanation as to what happened. I mean, there's like no other way that really could have been explained or ended, but I was just kind of like, really? After 1,000 pages, that's how we're ending it? The Dark Half was such a surprisingly good read. It, love it. Salem's Lot, love it. Pet Cemetery, love it. The Girl Who Loved Tom Gordon was probably my first Stephen King book, so it holds a special place in my heart. I think it's a really nice, shorter story. Anything The Dark Tower, yes. The Shining, do I really have to say? And yes, that means I liked it. The Eyes of the Dragon, his best fantasy novel. Needful Things, a glorious, gory good time. Cujo, I like the movie better. The Tommyknockers, an incredibly interesting concept, but overstays its welcome. Lacey's Story, yes, she gave him ice. Blaze, the only of his Bachman books that I've read. I do not remember a thing about it, but remember thinking like, yeah, that was fine. And Insomnia, excellent. So that's going to do it for this week, folks. Thank you so much for joining me. I am seeing more comments coming in. The videos are getting more views quicker each week, so there's some engagement going, and subscriber count is going up. So thank you so much for joining me for all of this. I love chit-chatting about books, so don't be afraid to leave me a comment. I will try to reply to any and everyone, even if you really disagree with me on something. We can disagree, and that's fine. And so anyways, thank you once again. You're all beautiful, wonderful people, and I will see you again pretty shortly. Happy reading, everyone.